This is the G podcast, where we focus on family, friends, finances, freedom, and our future, and everything else. This is the G podcast, and today we got a special guest. Che, the Black Bourbon Guy, is in the building. Let's get right to it. Yes, indeed, y'all. One more time. This is the G podcast, where we focus on family, friends, finances, freedom, and our future, and everything else. This is the G podcast. Thank you so much, and shout out to the Black Bourbon Guy for joining. Oh man, appreciate you for joining us.
Yo, thank you so much for having me on, man. It's my pleasure, absolutely. I've been following you for a minute, love the show, and just happy to be here to join the list of dope folks you've had on.
No, man, I appreciate that. And likewise, I actually came across, I saw your profile on LinkedIn, and it was around the time where I started dabbling into the world of bourbon. But a funny story, or what I thought is a funny story, where I heard your name randomly though off of social media, was at Alley 26. Very popular restaurant in the Durham area. And for those of you who don't know, they have a Whiskey Wednesday where from, I think, up until maybe 8 or so, but you can get like one pour at a nice price, and it's typically a decent pour, right? Me and my wife went there and had dinner, and it was right around the time, I guess, you had something going on at the establishment and you had just left. And so when I sat down, I don't think she expected me to know about the Whiskey Wednesday, but as soon as I asked about it, she made a point to tell me, hey, we had the Black Bourbon Guy just here. And I did. And at first I kind of looked at her sideways like, oh, okay. Thanks for telling me that the Black Bourbon Guy was just here, but you are really the Black Bourbon Guy. So before we dive into it, like, just talk to me about just that name before we start to learn some of the background of Black Bourbon Guy.
I mean, it's so much less about me being at the center of it than just centering Blackness in an industry that traditionally has not had any of that, right? Like when we think of images and names that are on bourbon bottles, traditionally they're old white men, right? Southern white men, old immigrants, but we know that there's nothing in this country that has been around this long that didn't have our fingerprints all around it and through it and our genius behind it. So just being a part of a number of people in the industry who are trying to bring attention to the fact that, one, there are Black people who don't just drink cognac all the time. And like, I love cognac, right? I love me some cognac, right? But like, have you ever had that experience at a bar where you walk in and somebody's like, yo, Hennessy, right?
No
and I'm
question.
like, please don't.
No question.
Oh,
no question.
God.
No question. It's such an assumption. Like, you hint, like, nah, I'd rather just have bourbon, but it's okay. It's okay.
Right. So, my background is restaurant industry, and the further you get along in that career, the less Black and brown it becomes, like rapidly. It's wild. I tell people, like, people don't believe me. I say, look, go into the best restaurants in any city and look around.
Mm-hmm.
You won't see many Black faces. And if you do, they're not in positions of power, right? They're not bartending. They're not waiting. They're bussing. They're running. Not to diminish the importance of any of those jobs, right? But they're not the money positions.
Mm-hmm.
And like, we want to make money, right? Like, Lord knows the busser would rather be walking home with $350 in their pocket from a bartending shift. So like, why doesn't that happen? Well, it doesn't happen for the same reason it doesn't happen in a lot of industries.
Word. No, we're gonna dive into that. The restaurant industry. And just given, post COVID and where the state of the industry is, it's a shifting time in my opinion. But like, you you came to North Carolina to go to college, but where were you originally from?
Brooklyn, New York, born in East New York, raised in Bed-Stuy.
Okay. And did you what made you even think about UNC Chapel Hill being in Brooklyn versus say some other options?
Uh, Ironically, it's my love for Chapel Hill also kind of includes my dislike of Duke University. If you think back to, I'm a hooper, right? Longtime basketball fan, grew up playing ball. Some of my best friends were met on the court. Some of my fiercest battles were had on the court in life.
Mm-hmm.
So I started watching college ball probably around the time that I was 8, 9. So we're talking early 90s. And you know what was going on in Tobacco Road in the early 90s, right? But when I took a look at the scene, like me growing up in inner city New York, Brooklyn, I looked at Chapel Hill's roster because both Duke and UNC were popular. And like we had like dudes from my neighborhood on that squad, right? Like, Kenny Smith came up in some places. You know what I mean? Ed Cota, one of my favorite point guards of all time, was from the hood, right? So it always felt to me, and the more I learned about Dean Smith, right, and what he represented for civil rights, whereas it concerns college basketball, I mean, the man used to integrate rooms simply by walking in with his players and assistant coaches. And because he was Dean, nobody was going to say anything about him. Like that legacy really appealed to me. Of course, throwing the whole Jordan thing. I was never a Knick fan. I was actually a Bulls fan. So love Chapel Hill. And then eventually found out they had an amazing school when it was time for me to go to school. So, I didn't know really where I wanted to go. I was fortunate enough to get a full ride to Chapel Hill. And so to Chapel Hill I went.
So wait, a full ride. Okay, word. So wow, so you're not the first person I've heard say this. It literally was the basketball affinity that sort of really first sparked the desire to want to go to the school, and that seems to be true for you as well.
Yeah, and not just that they were good at basketball, right? Like the culture. Dean Smith is one of the people that I greatly admire as a human being, and like that combined with the fact that they were nice pulled me in.
Okay, and then when you get this UNC, we know that your background is more extensive in the restaurant industry. What did you go to school actually thinking at the time? You were gonna, prepare yourself to be a what? Go to UNC, study this, and do what?
Oh, I feel like everybody comes in bio or one of the big 2 or 3 majors. So, I was a bio major. I'm a nerd at my core. So like I came in with a bunch of science credits and it was just the easiest thing for me. And the thing that at that point I was the most interested in. But after a little bit of time, I switched over to a psych major because that was just a lot more personally interesting. And bio, man, bio's great. And much love to all the people who were able to finish their bio major. But if I heard about Drosophila melanogaster one more time in a genetics class in my life, I was going to lose my shit. Just really don't care about fruit flies that much. But psychology was a lot more of an interesting pursuit for me, right? How people work. And I also saw it as something that regardless of where I went in life would be able to help me out, right? Being able to navigate people in a world where you have to live and work with people, I feel like is a good thing.
So you went from bio to psych. Like, how did you, just coming from Brooklyn to Chapel Hill, did you visit at all down here before you made that decision? Or did you just come down as soon as you got accepted, moved in, and started experiencing the triangle?
So as part of my scholarship program, I got to come and visit for a week, it wasn't a week. It was about 3 or 4 days, which was really nice. But it's hard to say when you take a vacation in a place whether you're actually going to enjoy living there. But it was more of a trip than I probably took to any other college, right? If you college touring, very rarely do you spend 3 days living and kicking it on a campus. And, of course, they pulling out all the stops, right? Because they want you to be impressed with them, but
The
I
best,
mean,
the
it
best
was a
calf
good experience.
menus, the best calf menus.
Oh no, they were not giving us cat food. Like we were getting like mama dips ordered in for events.
Mama dips. That's a Chapel Hill classic.
Yes, yes, yes.
Word up. And so, and so you were able to come visit via that program. What were some of just your initial impressions? Because I would imagine a bit of an adjustment growing up in Brooklyn.
Yes and no. So my parents split up when I was really young, and when I was about 5, I think my father moved down to Florida where he would be closer to my grandparents. And like we're not talking fun city Florida either. We talking like, you ever heard of Fort Myers in Southwest Florida?
No.
Okay, good. So we starting off at a weird place. So Fort Fort Myers has grown tremendously since I was a child, right? But it's a beach town on the southwest coast. So we talking Gulf side of Florida, and my grandparents lived in a town called LaBelle, tiny town that if you look it up is really, I mean, the biggest story I think on Wiki is that they were known for one of the like last official lynchings in the country.
Great reputation.
You
Outstanding
know,
reputation.
not far from Lake Okeechobee, Alligator Alley, but it had this like weird pocket of West Indians who lived in this small neighborhood. So that's how my grandparents ended up there. My grandmother was Antiguan. I had cousins who were Jamaican who grew up down there. So dad went down there with them. But I mean, this was real Florida, right? This was the Florida that when everybody else started to be introduced to the Florida that we now know and love to hate, I was sitting here looking at everybody like, man, where y'all been? Like you just now realize this?
That's crazy.
Welcome. Yeah. So I spent my summers there. I spent my winter breaks there. I spent my spring breaks there. Moving to Chapel Hill was a happy medium between that and Brooklyn.
Yeah. You know, that's funny too, because like, you know, because literally it's in the middle. It's like the pit stop between New York and Florida, if you will. So, and a lot of folks from New York do resettle in this area. There's like a influence that I think it has on North Carolina, where it makes it more North Carolina than South Carolina, for example, because of just like maybe it's the universities actually that make that happen specifically here. But aside from that, you get down here, like when did you like? Did you work in any restaurants in college, like as a waiter or a server? Like what did you do in school, say from that perspective?
So first restaurant job I had towards the end of school was at a place called the University Club, which was in the tall green pickle looking building off of 15501 in Durham.
Right.
Uh, and I started there serving, but worked there for about 3 or 4 years. And by the end, it ended up being my first management position when I was only maybe 24, 25.
Just to interject here for those who don't know what he's talking about. This place is it's been in Durham for a while. It's definitely like been one of the quote unquote nice places. It requires a membership, if I remember correctly, to eat there. Definitely got to wear a certain attire, jacket, type deal. Which is not normally the case in Durham. Durham is typically a spot where even like a nice restaurant, you can walk in there, chill. Like I could wear what I have on right now, frankly. And so but this place was definitely not like, you know, Chili's or something like that. It was you know, would we call it fine dining, or how would you categorize the restaurant?
I mean, they call it fine dining. So, you know.
So a fine dining establishment. That was your first experience as a server?
As a server, I mean, my first restaurant job period was We talking like high school summer McDonald's type deal.
Oh, word. So
Yeah,
you,
yeah,
so you,
yeah,
so
yeah.
you actually, okay. So you actually, before you became a server, did you continuously work in the background doing restaurant like jobs
Not
or what? Yeah.
not really. So I've always had an interest in food. I get that from my grandmother. She was an amazing cook, and I just used to sit in the kitchen and watch her do her thing. So like a nerd like interest in flavors has always been at the core of everything that I do. Right, like that woman bought me a KitchenAid stand mixer for my 13th birthday.
Mm.
And like I actually used to use it to make stuff. Like I'd come into school with like scratch made brownies for my girlfriend and weird like that when you're like 15 years old.
Yo, scratch made
Uh,
brownies is a winner.
I mean, who needs game when you can throw up some scratch made brownies at 15 years old?
Oh man.
And if you have both, then so yeah, when I, summer job needed something to do, I was looking around and like when I was 15, McDonald's was the only place that would hire me. So I went to McDonald's and that was my first opportunity for 2 summers making money. And, I didn't really need a ton of money at the time. It was just summer, mess around, ice cream, the occasional beer run if we could find somebody with an ID, that type of stuff.
Mm.
But
So
yeah,
so in that, I mean to cut you off, but while you in that McDonald's early age, are you actually thinking you might work in this industry as an adult, or are you like, are you thinking about like, oh, I might want to do something like this long term, or do you have any sort of like thing that you're kind of falling for with that experience?
no, McDonald's was terrible. Yeah. Like one of my serious judgments of people is if you go to a fast food restaurant and you talk smack about the service that you receive, right? Like I don't think you can understand how few anybody that gets paid $10 an hour to work in a miserable experience where they get harassed by some over pompous individual who's eating at McDonald's, right? Like, man, you are the worst of the worst.
Oh man, that is hilarious. Oh
So,
man.
like, I have the utmost respect for service industry people. And, not to disparage any community, but the lower the price point, the more difficult the restaurant. And that's not to
Mm,
say that people who are broke are bad customers. Is to say that restaurants with low price points have entitled people of all levels who come in and act a fool, right? So like rich people go to Burger King and they show their ass for like $6 Whoppers. Like it's wild.
yeah.
Wild.
Yeah, for $6 Whoppers. That is hilarious. Now today though, I don't think they cost $6, but that's something a little different. Today it's a little bit, the standards are changing, I think, a little bit too, because of the price point on fast food. But I do agree with your point of the type of mindset that actually argues over what you're receiving in a fast food line. Like you just be happy that it was hot and fresh. Like,
Yeah, man. Like if you came in with an order of 10 people and each of you ordered hamburgers and they all had different modifications on them, like be happy that they all had meat on the
yeah.
patty.
Yeah. Oh man. And so okay, so you didn't even get into that world of fine dining, because like I guess what my question is from the outside in, you mentioned earlier that there's certain money positions in the industry that do better than others. I don't think the average person is aware of like of what those are, and I think the average perception is more what you said in terms of the folks who we see doing the things that don't make as much as the others. And so when you're at a school like UNC, well, you did have a full scholarship. So I guess that's and I say like nobody could be like, we didn't pay for you to go work in the restaurant industry. But did people kind of like try to encourage you to not go this route, because you went to UNC and studied psychology? Like, I'm curious, did anybody ever try to like steer you away from, this sort of industry?
I think my mother is still upset I'm not a doctor. She may never get over that. I remind her that I told her I wanted to be a doctor when I was 5 and knew of like 3 professions as a whole. Right? It was either doctor, policeman, or fireman. You know what I mean? So yeah, no, I say that to say, love you, Ma, not to pick on you, but uh, yes, a number of people look at the service industry in this country as a failure, right? I think back to when we were children, and there was this whole adage that was told to so many people in our generation that, like, hey, go to college, go spend money doing whatever, and if you go to college, it will all work out, right? Like, especially for Black folks, previous generation didn't have that opportunity. And so they fought hard for us to have that opportunity. And there was this whole idea that college was a panacea. The reality, however, was many of us got out of college with so much debt,
Mm-hmm.
so much debt. And maybe college wasn't for you, right? Maybe a vocational career would have been a better option for you, right? Like,
Right.
I think even the sports world is a great microcosm, right? If you are talented enough to play basketball and be recruited as a 5-star or whatever star recruit to UNC or Duke, I don't give a what your SAT score is, right? Like, that's not, if you happen to want to invest in education, that's great. But if you want to be a basketball player, I think you should be a basketball player. If you want to be a plumber, you can go be a plumber, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's lots of money and value in all of those things. And we now find ourselves in a world where we have so many, like, we're in need of all those things, right? Like, I'm a homeowner. I can't tell you how much I could use a good plumber,
Yeah, no
right? Or a
question.
good electrician. And like, also, we know how much we pay these people. I wish, like, I wouldn't be a plumber or an electrician, but I know a lot of people whose worlds would have been changed if somebody had said, hey, you can make $100,000 as a plumber or an electrician or a waiter, right? Like, depending on where you live, you can make 6 figures a year waiting tables or as a bartender. There are places where you can make 6 figures a year and only work for a couple seasons and take 2-3 months off a year and go do whatever the fuck you want. That's not Durham, right? But we talking like,
yeah.
If you are about your business, like, what do the kids say now? If you standing on
They
business,
standing on business. Yeah, that's what the kids are saying. They standing on that. You stand on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, if you were about your paper, man, like, I know some people who made serious money in this area. You know what I'm saying? Like, I paid for my wedding. I bought a house, right? Was able to have and raise or begin raising at least 2 kids, all while working in a restaurant. And I promise you, I was making better money than some of my colleagues. Now, like, that's not to say that, you know, do whatever makes you happy, I think is the message for me, right? What kept me in restaurants is, like, I would, when I was young, I had my experience at McDonald's. I got to the university club, and it opened my eyes, not so much to a love of the business, but to a love of the products in the business. Cause I got to taste some like really high level stuff. At that time, the club was owned by Coach K's son-in-law. So you can imagine the type of things that used to come through that building, right? Like David Falk.
What's some examples of some of that upper echelon stuff you were able to actually get exposed to that you remember?
I mean, we talking like, so are you into wine at all?
A little bit. I'm not a sommelier.
Yeah. I mean, who is, right? But they used to have like wine dinners every now and again, like once a year, where you be pouring out 80, $90 bottles of Chardonnay and, bottles of Cab that ran for anywhere from 125 to upwards of 200.
Mm-hmm.
And, these cats leave and there's half a bottle left, and your manager calls you over and he's like, yo, you need to try this, right? And it was that over and over again. Like the biggest one was once a year, David Falk, who was Coach K and Michael Jordan's agent, used to come into town to have dinner with K, and they do it at the club. And I mean, these dudes would just spend stupid money on wine. We talking like $2,500 bottles.
Mm.
But they were, 60-year-old men. So naturally, a lot of wine got left behind if you're opening up 2, 3 bottles. So I'm getting to try things that are on like the world wine list top 50 when I'm 25 years old. And,
Mm.
when I get off work, I'm still in my, Incredible Hulk phase. And I don't mean workout. I mean the drink.
When it was actually Hennessy back in the day was the preference.
Yes.
Yeah, when it was that Incredible Hulk era. Oh my god. Oh, bro, you bringing back some memories. That Incredible Hulk era. Yes, sir. Boy, that had up. That was the go-to, boy. Oh my gosh.
That was so nasty. Oh, so nasty.
I would never drink that today. Yeah, for
No.
sure. Oh man. But shout out out to them incredible Hulksters out there still holding it down.
Yes. Shout out to Growth.
Mm-hmm. Word up. So the University Club, yeah, man, I've been to that place a couple times growing up. I honestly might have been one of my first experiences as a young black male growing up in Durham, getting exposed to what we would call fine dining, where you had to wear something a certain way and they got to come out all proper with the everything. And I'm looking at the menu like, is it really okay if I order this? Because everything looks expensive to me. You know what I'm saying? So I can imagine, and this is probably right. I'm already thinking of the time, and like you said, like that era, Durham restaurant scene hadn't popped yet. So in terms of what's really happening locally from a fine dining experience, you had this place, maybe Farrington House. That might be.
You had Nana's in Durham.
Nana's
was popping.
Yeah, yep. Nana's. OG Nana's. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
OG Nana's.
Yeah. Yeah. I grew up right around the corner from that area. So
okay.
Word up. And so how long? So okay, you get this experience. Now all of a sudden it's hard to go back to eating that hamburger helper once you start having some of that filet mignon. So now you over here sipping the top-notch wines, getting introduced to this world of where you can taste the difference too. It's like, okay, like I'm learning how to taste. Did somebody teach you on the job how to actually taste the wine the right way, or were they just telling you, here, sip it? Or did you get that sort of training, if you will?
Not formally. So I met a lot of people who taught me over time. Made a lot of friends, worked in the industry for 20 years, right? And I'm a decently friendly individual. I like to learn as much as I can from people. So I didn't get as much formal on the job training as far as that. But when you're hungry, right? Again, standing on that business, when you work in a place like that and you hear that somebody's having a wine expo, it's like, hey, can I go to that wine expo?
Mm-hmm.
But then at that wine expo, you meet wine salespeople, you meet winemakers, and they teach you various tricks. So, I mean, I immersed myself in it as much as I could. And one of the great things about restaurants is, depending on where you work, you can have access to a lot of this stuff for, the cheap or free 99 if you can do it right. You know what I mean? Because getting an invitation to a wine expo means I have the opportunity to taste, somewhere between 10 and 50 wines, and I don't have to pay a dime.
Just because you got into the expo.
Yep, just because I got into the expo, because their goal is to sell wine. So what they do is distributors will have an expo, and their whole goal is to put salespeople and bottles in front of as many people as possible, right? It's like shooting fish in a barrel.
Mm-hmm.
So they invite a bunch of restaurants out, but you know, the restaurants, they might use it differently. Some of them might be coming legitimately to buy, but sometimes they just use it as a party opportunity or a bartering tool, or
Right.
hey, my management team is off for that day, like we're not really trying to come and taste, but we're using this as the beginning of the turn up time, and then after that we're going to go someplace else. So if you can get in that door, right, you use it for however you want to use it. And I frequently use different stuff like that.
Word. And like the name, the Black Bourbon Guy, it's not the Black Wine Guy. Are you beyond bourbon? So should I not assume that bourbon is the thing and there's other specialties, or is bourbon really the main spiel? Because we haven't got to bourbon yet.
Bourbon is the thing that at this point I have spent the most time studying and the most time drinking. But I have a fascination about all things fermented. Like wine is still my first love. In the world of like actually drinking something and being introduced to it being an experience and not just something that is here to facilitate you having fun. Wine was the thing that first did that for me, right? It was, and it's not about the expensive stuff either, right? If you have a $2,500 bottle of wine, like, yeah, that's a life-changing experience. But then there's also
that's a little flex right there. Yeah.
I mean, look, I didn't buy it. That's Coach K money.
Hey, cheers to that.
Yeah, for sure. But it's just about taking opportunities where you find them, and that was the first thing that really transformed me, right? Like I will forever be able to go back to that place in time and like not necessarily remember how that bottle tasted, but it's going to be a long time before that memory goes away from me. And I think we all have that in the food industry to some extent. Like I have actually a lot more with food, right? Because the more you drink, the less you remember. But the food and beverage industry, if it hits just right, and part of it hitting just right is the environment, the experience, who you're with. And if the food hits and the drinks hit, you will forever be able to come back to that moment and remember it in a positive way. And I think that is amazing. And I really enjoy studying so that I can help provide that experience for other people. It's one of the things that I used to really enjoy. I had a boss in the restaurant industry who used to say, "Yeah, that's what gets me off." And I was like, "Joe, you have to stop talking. You have to stop saying that."
Yeah. That's a wild one.
Nobody wants to hear what you get off on. But like that, I enjoy that. You know what I mean? I like entertaining at my house, and when I put together a great meal and pair it with a dope whiskey or a great bottle of wine or so on and so forth, and you just see people's minds go, especially when it's something that they don't expect, something that's outside of their comfort zone. And a lot of people, especially in the Black community, we are very hesitant to go outside of our comfort zone.
Right.
Whereas it concerns food and drink. Like I like what I like. I like what my mama made. You know what I'm saying? And it's not just us. I don't mean to throw us under the bus. There's a ton of people who are like that, but there is a whole world of experiences and memories to be had. So it started with wine, but I feel like it is kind of, we're going to be in the whiskey sphere for a while. I had a very strong beer phase. So if you ferment it, I probably know a little something about it, but bourbon and whiskey in general is it, as you can tell right now.
Yeah, and like you say, you self-identified as a nerd, started with the science, biology, and what everything you're describing, like that is a very scientific process to create these things. Wine, beer, whiskey. But actually, I want to know, like, how would you just describe your overall experience at UNC? Because you had, maybe what you expected, what you thought before you got there, but how would you just describe your overall experience at the university?
Ooh. Overall, love my alma mater. We have a very complicated relationship, however, as I'm sure a lot of Black folks will tell you, the experience for many of us at a PWI can be an interesting experience, and many of us can thrive through it, but there is a level of adversity that exists in so many of those situations that is difficult for many students of color, right? It's not just Black kids. If you are a Native student, if you are an Asian student, your experience can be difficult at a PWI, right? And if we look at what is currently going on with the numerous attacks on historically Black fraternities and sororities, like, to pretend that that animus is new is, I mean, you're fooling yourself, right? Like, that sort of nature, this idea of trying to rein in Black students, like, we want you here, but we need you to stay in this little area right here. So even if you look back before me, long before me at UNC, there has been a history of struggle to some extent for many students, both publicly and privately. If you look at the story of the founding of the Sonia Hayes Black Cultural Center, I mean, that was, it was difficult, right? And Black students have long had to march and boycott in order to find their place. And I think that evolves. One of the things that stood out to me, especially as a Brooklyn boy, when I first got down here, was hearing from people how liberal Chapel Hill is. And then you go on a tour, and the first thing we saw was Silent Sam. And I'm like, well, who's Silent Sam? And then they're like, oh, well, that's a Confederate soldier. And I'm like, man, you got a Confederate soldier in your front yard, and you talk.
The losers,
You're like,
the losers are in the front yard. Yeah,
I mean, yeah,
proud
right.
losers. Yeah.
So, I mean, it was very clear that, like, hey, man, look, if you got a Confederate soldier on your front yard and you have a number of buildings named after extremely racist and or straight up Confederate individuals,
Yeah.
you are not as liberal as you think you are, right? Like, you might be liberal compared to Jesse Helms, North Carolina, or Strom Thurmond, South Carolina, but, like, coming from BK, I don't know, like, you ever seen The Princess Bride?
Yeah.
Like, you keep using this word liberal. I don't think it means what you think it does, you know?
Mm-hmm. It's liberal for here is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, since I'm really happy to see the change, a lot of the change that's happened on UNC's campus, right? It's like to come on campus as a former student and to see that many buildings names have been changed, and some more still need to come down, right? But to see that the liberal element is there, right? That's the part that I love about the school, and that's the place in which I felt comfortable. But you know, like I said, my relationship with my alma mater is complicated, but I will always and forever be a Tar Heel, and am happy for my time there, because experience isn't just about things being positive. It's the ability to succeed through adversity and to take the lessons with you.
Yeah, for sure. You got any favorite Franklin Street spots from back in the day that, whether they exist or not, did you have any go-tos back then?
Oh man. So whatever the club was, I think at one point it was Element, but in the old Bank of America building on the Rosemary Street side.
Mm-hmm.
up until they changed it to like that awkward spot with all the beds in it. Cause I just, no, that's not, no, no. That was when I realized I was too old for the club.
Yeah.
Yeah, that. And of course, I feel like everybody went to Avalon if
Avalon.
you were
Yeah.
in Chapel Hill between like 2000 and 2000 and, I don't know, whenever they closed because started getting shot.
Right. They, yeah. No, yeah. Avalon was definitely a very popular spot, yo. Yeah, because as growing up in Durham, we used to go out to UNC all the time to parlay. But yeah, we didn't get much love from the brothers on campus. I have to say, man, they really didn't want the Durham on campus like that, from my experience.
It's not just the Durham. We didn't want any on campus. Like we.
Oh man.
I don't know if you've ever heard about the ratio, but the ratio was something that was greatly appreciated. And if you arrive with a penis, you are adversely affecting the ratio. So why are you here?
Yeah, man. Y'all are territorial, man. That is crazy.
Look, go back to your own campus where the ratio is not as good, which is why you find yourself here.
Hey, look, I gotta admit, man. Hey, look, like I said, man, I got a lot of love out of Carolina, man. It's always been loved out there, but not with the fellas, man. It's always been the ladies, and I'm having to overcome where I'm like, man, how I'm gonna navigate this situation right here. Like, but I appreciate you being honest though, because that's I be telling people, I be like, man, y'all Carolina, man, why y'all act like y'all want no on campus, man? Why y'all acting like that? And they act like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, y'all know exactly what I'm talking about, man. Y'all don't want us over there.
But you know what's funny? Like I didn't have a problem with like cats from like random Durham. Like if you live in Durham and you come to kick it, man, I don't give a like come on through. It was the cats who I knew who were coming from like actually thirsty campuses. Like if you went to state, you went to North Carolina State University, and you frequently came to our campus. Like, nah, man, go back to Raleigh. Yeah. I know it's hot, and I know it's a bunch of unhappy dudes. Like, that's unfortunate. You should have made a better choice for your college education.
That's hilarious. That is hilarious. Yo, okay, so overall good experience, good enough to keep you here in the triangle. Clearly, you went to school here. You ended up, establishing some roots down here. Once you left University Club, no, was it called? Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Once you left there, did you officially have the bug yet, where you started like really? I mean, you always, like you said, taking advantage of opportunities, but are you seeing it more long term or more of like, this is getting me by for now?
So at the time, funny story, I got fired from the University Club, and how is an amazing story. So one of my really good friends, an individual by the name of Bomani Jones, got me fired from the University Club.
Oh,
not directly. Wow. Yeah. Bo's the homie. He'll tell you the story if you ask him. So it was right around the time that a young man by the name of Harrison Barnes was being recruited by both UNC and Duke. All the Duke coaches, etc.
I remember this.
Yeah. It was hardcore, man. It was hardcore. He was the number one recruit in the country. It was a big deal.
Yeah.
Duke coaches and shit. They had an event one night. All of a sudden, my manager comes outside and he's like, "Hey, so I don't know how you tell you this, but somebody in that room just got a phone call from Harrison Barnes, who informed them that he isn't going to Duke." Right? This was like 3 or 4 days before it broke to national media. So, right, decision day I think was coming like Monday. This was Friday. So I'm geeked. Absolutely geeked. So, I called my homeboy and I'm like, "Hey, don't go too far with this, but here's what I just found out." So he called somebody else and was like, "Look, blah blah blah. This is what I'm hearing. Don't put this out there. This rotten mother posts a story that says Durham waiter leaks
Oh,
that.
No.
oh, wow.
Yeah. So I hope I never personally meet this individual because snitches and stitches.
This is and so just as a little bit, because a lot of people don't know that before Bomani blew up, he was in the triangle.
Yep.
He was in the triangle as I don't know if officially if he was like a local beat reporter, but I know he had a local thing as a sports guy in the triangle before he went to the machine over at ESPN.
Yeah, he started writing locally here, and then ended up doing like
a radio
sports
show.
radio.
Yeah.
Sports radio in the area before ESPN picked him up and started paying him a lot of money. Happy for that dude.
Yeah, man, he's doing his thing. And what you're saying is that you're responsible for all his success. No, what you're saying is what you're saying is that he shared a piece of information with a third party who shall not be named, or who was this again?
I don't even remember that dude's name.
Okay, but you remember his face, and if you see him, all right.
On site.
This person wrote Durham waiter XYZ says about Harrison Barnes in the situation.
Right. And I don't even remember the specifics of where he put it out, but I know that by the next morning, I'm getting phone calls from people who like now work for Inside Carolina who are like, hey, you need to watch out because like I heard this, and if you put two and two together, anybody can figure out it's you. I was off that day, walked into work the next day. They were like, yeah, we got to talk to you.
Oh, wow.
And so the way it went down, like I wasn't officially fired because, I was like, look, first off, I don't know about like, do you have a record that I talk to anybody about anything? Like all you have is a story from some random that I've never met that a waiter. And for the record, I'm not even a waiter, right? And as a young black man, I feel a little bit insulted that you are trying to demean my position with this story, right? But unless you can prove that this tracks back to me, here's what's going to happen. This is going to be a layoff situation, and I'm going to collect unemployment, and I'm going to get a recommendation from you whenever I please.
You went there and put your balls on the table just like that.
It was a negotiation.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because like here's the other thing.
White folks don't like to be talked to like that. They don't tend to want to negotiate when you start talking that big boy talk.
No, but like when you talk it indirectly, which is the way they like to be spoken to, they prefer it, right? So like when you work around people like that for long enough, you learn some things.
You learn the language.
Right. But also you learn some stories. And so, if y'all are concerned about this story coming out, are there any other stories that you might be concerned about coming out?
It doesn't matter how you feel.
No doubt. So that is a very, very, like, I remember this time period. I remember the story at the time. Because Harrison Barnes was, at the time, they were saying this was the best recruit since LeBron. Like, he was the most touted, right? Like, and
I was excited about that dude. And I don't get excited about recruits like that, but he was nasty in high school.
No, yeah, he was the highest scouted recruit since Bron, and it was between Duke and UNC. And a lot of people thought it was going to be Duke at the time. Like, that's what everybody was thinking.
I was one of them.
And the story I remember hearing from back in the day was like, not that I don't know when and where they found out, but basically they found out and Coach K went crazy. Like, that's the story I heard. I heard he found out and he went crazy. Is this incident happen to be correlated with the same thing that I'm referencing here? Because
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Nah.
All I can say is I wasn't in the room. I was told by somebody else that the call happened, and it was immediately obvious who the call came from, and that the response was a lack of happiness, right?
Oh, shout out to the GOAT. Shout out to the GOAT, man. Shout out to the GOAT. Oh my
The
God.
the who?
The GOAT. Hey,
The go to what?
we don't need to go back and forth here. We don't need to derail. We don't need to derail this conversation. But I mean, even one would have to objectively, when we talk about GOATs, like he's the greatest college basketball coach of all time.
Isn't he like third on the all time wins list right now?
I don't know what all time wins. I don't know what that means. In what era?
Oh, okay.
Third.
I mean, in this era, actually, it's funny you ask what era. So his era just ended because today, literally today, I posted a Facebook message. It's the anniversary. What are we? March 5th of his final game.
This is that's the only like. There's nothing that can be said about that. An egg was huge egg was laid. Like, it's not even.
See, I don't even have to say it.
I'm upset. Like low key, it took me a while to cheer for Bankero. It took me a while because I was like what? Like this is how? Like what? Like nah.
He did it to himself.
It took me a while.
The boys weren't ready.
Yeah, man. They weren't.
Like,
they weren't. They were not. They were not. They were not. It was embarrassing. It was embarrassing.
Paolo Banchero and 4 from Lakewood with a proper coach could have run us. Like we were like unranked that year, but there was no reason.
No, that everything that I'm just glad that y'all got to the end and lost. That's what made everything at least a little bit better. But
that's fair. I respect that.
The like you said, just the run. Everything was so improbable. Like this for that happened with that team. But aside from that, when you just look, we don't need to go back and forth here. The GOAT of college basketball. There's no question. There's no question. The different eras that he had to play through, the volume of not total wins, but total championships. You feel what I'm saying? Across competitive eras, across one and done, pre-one and done, Dean Smith himself competing to the likes of come on, man. This is, and we're not even going to talk about pro product. I mean, a lot of pros. The modern NBA is essentially like Duke University plus. I mean,
I really enjoy watching Grayson Allen out there doing his thing night after night. It's joyful.
He's one of the most efficient 3-point scorers in the league.
Love him.
They counted him out. I mean, look, we look. Let's not go back and forth about Carolina players in the NBA because not a lot have even really gotten drafted here recently. So we don't need to necessarily talk about a lot of those folks. But
oh no, we've had a difficult run, but they're still ahead on a pike outside of the Dean Dome. And like, if you call him the GOAT, then we got the GOAT's head on a pike.
That's the only This is. I just want people to know this is what it's like when you meet somebody who's a real, true, diehard Carolina fan. They will hang the nail on one point for the entire duration of the conversation. I guarantee you, that is what they do. That's crazy how I've got him froze right there because he's looking crazy. Let's see, he come back. Still there?
Yeah. I don't know what happened. My video just cut out.
Yeah, you see what you look like where it cut out?
No.
Do you not see it? You don't see it?
No, and now I'm echoing over here. I don't know what.
Hold on, I got you. Hold on. I got you. There you go.
Word.
No, that was funny. That was funny. So okay. let's move to a different topic here so that we can get back to some other things. All right, so I can't even remember what I was saying before that. But okay. This is where okay. So you were telling the story about all right. So you leave the university club under interesting circumstances, unique circumstances. And I guess my question is, at what point in the journey did bourbon become a point of interest?
So I'm still hearing feedback here.
Let me see.
Hold on, let me.
You still hear feedback now?
Check. No, I'm good. Okay. Around the time that my first son was on the way, it was time for me to stop bartending and to get into something a little more stable, right? Because you can make a ton of money in bartending. The problem is it's high risk, high reward, right? So you'll have nights where you will make all the cash. You could make your rent in 2 nights behind a bar. But then there are also like Tuesdays where you'll walk out with not a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're trying to run a family, you can't make XYZ money this week and blah, blah, blah next week. Like, even if it all averages out across the year, it's a difficult situation to live in. So I got into management for the second time in my life. The hotel at 21C, Museum Hotel in downtown Durham, was just starting to be revamped. So a group of investors had purchased the Hill building, which had been around since the Art Deco era in downtown building. At the time, it was the tallest building in the area.
Mm-hmm.
But
the old
they
CCB
opened
building.
Yep. Old CCB and then SunTrust before they took it over. So they opened up a restaurant and bar, beautiful space that was based on a couple of other locations. And I was on the opening management team. Now, the first location of this hotel group was in Louisville, Kentucky. So naturally, one, we had a great bourbon selection. The whole hotel, a lot of people don't know, was started with Brown Forman money. So Brown Forman is the parent company of a huge number of brands, including but not limited to Jack Daniels and Old Forester, right? Just based on those two alone, that's long money right there. So that's where a lot of that initial money came from for 21C. So long connections to Kentucky. And during my time there, I met a bunch of people who were from Kentucky. And one of the best ways to get a whiskey education is to walk up to a chef who really knows their walk them to the bar, pay the bartender for 2 rounds of whatever they say you're going to order. Let that person order because they know better than you do, and then ask them to tell you about it. And I did that for like 2-3 years, right? And that was
in the heart of bourbon country too.
Well, it was up here, but it was with people who knew their.
Got it.
And that was 2015 when you could still get a lot of stuff, right? Like we could get Buffalo Trace, you could get Blanton's, like things still hadn't gone crazy yet. So I got to sample all kinds of stuff. Really, I mean, at this point, it was almost 9 years ago, but the bourbon boom hasn't been going on for nearly as long as people have. So I got a whiskey education on some dope stuff for a real cheap price.
Yo, so as a newbie to the scene, especially in North Carolina with the way they regulate the alcohol, it's tough to get certain brands of bourbon, certain bottles, like you said, the Buffalo Trace, Blanton's, Eagle Rare, even like Knob Creek, the 12-year. I never see it available. And you're saying that that hasn't always been the case as recent as how long ago?
Like 2015, 2016. It wasn't until Mad Men came on TV that bourbon exploded again. But from the end of Prohibition, so we talking 1933 to 2015, the whiskey industry wasn't as strong as as today's sales would have you believe. Not even close.
And you credit, or it's like known to be credited for the show Mad Men because of how much they would drink on the show.
Probably
Don
more coincidence. Yeah, I mean, probably more coincidence than anything, but like we, it's no, everybody knows how easily celebrities can drive sales, right?
Yeah.
You pair the right celebrity with the right thing, with the right environment. So like look at Sex in the City, Carrie Bradshaw and Cosmopolitans. Like Cosmos were all the rage for 10 years
Facts.
because of that show. And like I used to watch Sex in the City, and Carrie Bradshaw was a horrible human being, like one of my least favorite characters on the show. But something about that synergy worked, right? In terms of pushing that drink. So every now and again, you get a show that comes along and they hit it just right. And I'm not talking the ones that do paid advertisement, right? So like when people are watching Yellowstone and they're like, "Oh my God, it had, Blanton's or Weller on there." Like, no, that was a paid situation. And like good for Sazerac. Much love for the company. I'm
Right.
talking about the organic situation where we're not trying to push a product. We just have an iconic character who's doing something so often that we associate those two, and love them or hate them, that thing takes over. But I feel like for Dom Draper, like, yeah, it might have gotten a lot of people into whiskey and old fashions, but then they quickly found out that was delicious, which is
Mm-hmm.
something that I think this country had lost sight of for 80 years.
That's crazy. That's crazy. Yo, I came across one bottle of Blanton's at an ABC store in the last couple of years. Like I have no way to track this stuff. And it's like that one bottle, like it was a random time I went in. I was just happened to go in there. They were like, "You looking for anything?" I was like, "You don't happen to have nothing rare in here, do you?" He was like he didn't want to say it out loud. He didn't want to. He didn't want to say it out loud. He was like, point me over to the spot, and I was like, "Yo, that's crazy." So it's like, man, but you can get stuff for resale, but I'm talking about retail price where you just walk in and can just get it straight from the store at the retail price. It's crazy that you're telling me that this is a new sort of thing. I thought this was just the standard, bro. I ain't even gonna lie to you.
No, and like it's a messed up situation, right? So we're in an ABC state, which for people who don't know, we're an alcohol control state. So we're set up on a 3-tier system. The distilleries have to sell to a distributor, and then the distributor has to sell to the state board. The state board then distributes to all of the counties. The counties distribute to its individual stores, right? So it's a whole lot of trickle down, but at the top, somebody is more or less controlling what we have access to.
Right.
And that makes it really difficult in terms of getting a large quantity of things because we're relying on a very small number of people to make decisions on what is a rapidly expanding number of products, right? So it bottlenecks us in that sense. Also, the lack of ability for individual stores to order a case at a time or so on and so forth makes it hard to get the rare stuff, right? Because nobody's going to ship a pallet of Heaven Hill Heritage, right? You're going to get what you get. And so if people are over bargaining, there's a lot of limitations. But we do get a fair amount of good stuff in this state, and it's all retail, which is something that I cannot say for any of the non-ABC controlled states. And there are
Right.
17 ABC control states. So it's literally a third of the country. A lot of people don't know that.
Right.
Right? It ain't just us. There's a lot of states where that's a thing. But in those non-ABC controlled states, like you could find all the Blantons you want if you want to pay $150 for a
Yeah.
bottle. There's $60. And as far as I'm concerned, whether I don't see it in the store or whether it's hitting for a 300% increase, both functionally the same thing to me. I'm not getting it, right? So access everywhere is a problem for different reasons.
Mm-hmm. And man, so that first experience, I guess, let me ask this question because the restaurant industry post-COVID, a lot of restaurants locally didn't make it through, and some that have implemented the 20% living wage automatically on the checks. Like, just talk to me about that reality. You sort of talked about it earlier about on some weeks or some weekends you might be able to walk away with the rent, some Tuesdays, but it's a little bit different. The tip system, right? Like, should it stay according to, that traditional model of like just letting people tip what they want, or do you think it's better to have that 20% standard that doesn't have as much fluctuation?
I'm going to propose a third option because I don't think that. So I think option 2 is better than option 1. I hate the tip system, right? The tip system is something that has its basis in slavery and subsequent emancipation after the Civil War. So early in the day when this country was, begrudgingly accepted that we had to allow Black people to do things since we were now all free, right? After the 500,000 people that we lost in that big war that was strictly about that thing. We implemented the tipped wage system, right? And it was largely for people like Black porters who worked on railroads. So it was this idea that companies could pay these people at sub minimum wage and that somehow that wage would be supplemented by their customers. Now imagine this. You are a Black porter in 1875 making God knows what pennies per hour. And the assumption is that your white customers, imagine you work in the South, people who are probably salty about the fact that you no longer work for them for free are going to tip you. And then they said that, hey, if these people don't get minimum wage, then, they can file grievances, blah, 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 blah. But like, who knows how to do that? What the You still there?
Still there? I'm still here.
Yeah. I don't know why my phone told me that I pressed the emergency 911 thing, but clearly I haven't really moved. I don't understand what's going on here. All right, let's try that. See if it works. Cam back on. Cool. So, what was I talking about? Porter system. That's right. Right. So it was from the start. It was a way to underpay Black people and pretend that we were giving them legitimate employment, right? So you could send all these employment stats up to the federal government and say, hey, Reconstruction is going well. We're giving these people jobs. The problem being that practice continued for years. And then fast forward to modern day, and there are a number of lobbying groups who benefit incredibly from the tip system being in place because it's one of the few industries in which you can produce and sell a product without including the price of labor. And completely exonerating you as a business owner, not completely, but for the most part, exonerating you as a business owner from paying a major portion of your labor force. And like that to me is insane, right? Like imagine being able to go into a car dealership and say, hey, that Mercedes over there is 85 grand, but my salesperson was a dickhead, so I only want to pay 75. Like, no, they laugh your out the door, right? But like that's what happens at restaurants. Like people go in and that you're paying 20% less of what you should be paying. And a lot of people make waiters sing and dance to get that extra 20%. I hate those people, just like I hate the people who go into Burger King. I met somebody who told me that, unless my server is like running fast, I don't tip them 20%. I'm like, man, if your server is running, something is wrong.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's a problem. You should also be running with them out of the restaurant. But it's wild that right in front of our faces, we have this industry that federal law has put in this mechanism that allows these businesses to cheat their employees and to say that like, hey, if you don't get up to whatever the federal minimum wage is or whatever the minimum wage is for your state, then we have to supplement it. But like, how many restaurants do you imagine are running pay reports where they know those kind of stats, right? And if they do know and they don't care, they're probably assuming that those people who are at the lower end of the pay scale are not going to be reporting themselves. So I did really well in the tip system because, again, stand on business. I'm here to make money and I want to know how to make it the best. And that's to know my and to sell products, right? But everybody has bad nights and bad shifts. And if a business is viable, the employees who make it viable should be paid fairly by that business, right? For the same reason that NIL is bullshit because the schools aren't paying these kids, sitting here and leaning on customers to supplement wages for a business is garbage. And it's a practice that needs to change. So I hate the tip system, even though I benefited mightily from it during my career. I also don't like the 20% gratuity because I just think the price is the price, right? And I don't think it will ever change because it would require everybody getting on the same page and asking the public to pay more for a thing than they currently are is just not a thing that people are willing to do, right? So to say that, let's say we're going to wake up tomorrow and every single restaurant in this country is going to have a 20% pay bump. And that 20% is going to go directly to their front of house employees. What do you think that would do to the number of people who actually went out, right? Like to the actual restaurant economy, that would probably be a death knell. So I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that it needs to change.
Yeah, and I've lived in Amsterdam, and that was where I first experienced. Well, even actually in Mexico, it wasn't a place that you're expected to leave a tip. And in Amsterdam, really anywhere in Europe where we went, tips weren't really a thing. You pay and you leave, and nobody's looking for a tip. So they get paid some sort of working living wage, it seems. But I feel what you mean too in terms of that perspective of offloading that cost, because for most businesses who are at scale, labor is the biggest expense. Especially when you start talking about businesses in multiple locations and all that it takes to keep stuff running. Labor is typically your number one expense over everything. So, yeah, that is a crazy model when you frame it like that. That I don't think I ever really even thought about too from a business perspective. You're offloading the cost of human capital on customers versus the business finding ways to finance that. That's a interesting perspective.
It's huge, and I can't blame the restaurants, right? Because it is what it is, and like you can't come out here charging 20% more for the same product as your next door neighbor and expecting people to patronize you. So you are forced, if you open a restaurant as it is, to work within that framework. But it's a bad framework, and it's one that makes many of its employees like burnt out and feel undervalued. Like imagine so if you've worked in a restaurant, you've seen a scenario where you have 5 servers on for a night, right? And you come in and all 5 servers come in and the manager looks at them and he says, hey, or she says, hey, we've only got XYZ reservations, right? So maybe you got childcare to come in tonight. You definitely probably expended some sort of money, whether it was bus fare or gas to get to work. You've been here for a half hour and you're going to go home and you've only clocked in for that half hour, right? So you at 2:13, you will have made $1.05 that you will be taxed for because that business had a bad night and didn't absorb it for themselves, so they passed it off to you, right? Like that's crazy that happens, but it happens all of the time in restaurants, and then the responsibility comes to the employees to manage it as opposed to the business figuring out, well, like, why don't we have enough people, right? Or why isn't my schedule more efficient? Why am I not doing a better job of forecasting so that I don't waste people's time and money? But that sort of thing happens all over the industry. And because we allow them to offset the cost of labor, nobody says anything. And many businesses lean on that and succeed in spite of really poor management.
Mm. And do you, being on that side as somebody who did live off of tips, do you start to profile people when they walk in a restaurant? Like, start to size up, like, probably not going to tip that well. Oh, this is probably going to do better than this. Like, do you actually start to, profile people or even stereotype people? And then the number one question is it true what they say about Negroes? Do they tip less than others?
I stereotype based on behavior, not on looks, right? Certain behaviors certainly lead to tippers, and I don't think that is true across the board, right? Like, I've had people who were awful pains in the ass, but seemed to realize that they were awful pains in the ass, and so tipped really well accordingly, right? But there are so let me backtrack. One of the things that I tell people, because not every bad restaurant experience is the restaurant's fault. And this is something that a lot of people don't understand. You have to understand yourself. You have to manage your expectations. It's a lot like getting into a relationship, right? Like, how many people break up with somebody and are willing to be like, yeah, like, it was me. Here's what I did, right? Everybody goes to a restaurant and they're like, man, they up. It's like, okay. But then you go out with that person and you see their dining habits and you just be like, man, Jesus Christ, bro. Like, what do you want these people to do? Like, how many fiery hoops do you need to jump through? Like, you just sent back your second entree because there was an item on the menu and you don't know what it was, but then it came here and you asked what it was and told them you were allergic to it. But, like, you didn't read it and say anything the first time, right? Or maybe you didn't understand it, because the world of food can be very complicated and fancy, right? We use all kinds of fancy words to describe simple things. And so there's a lot of food illiteracy, right? There's just a lot of people don't understand. And there's a hesitance to ask questions. And then these items show up and they're like, oh, I don't want that, right? But again, at a restaurant, now that business owner, it's expected that they take it back because you don't like it, pretty much regardless of the reason, which is another terrible business model, right? Like, if I sell you a book, and you don't like that book, you bought a book.
Oh my gosh. No, it's a fact. This is a fact.
If you open up a bag of popcorn from the store and you don't like that bag, like, well, you just bought a bag of popcorn. But at a restaurant, like, people go in and they do all kinds of crazy stuff. And so when you see those behaviors, you know that those people are going to be bad tippers, right? Because there's a social contract that you enter into when you come into a restaurant. And you understand this if you come up going to restaurants, if you have the opportunities, like you said, to go visit fine dining establishments. Everything doesn't need to be snooty, but there's a social contract for every room that we walk into, right? When you go in a strip club, there's a social contract. When you go into the club, whatever room you walk into, like, in the Black community, we call it the game. And the game is out there and it's play or get played. But when you walk into a restaurant, you have to know yourself. You have to know your tastes. You have to know your allergies. You have to relay those things to the waiter. You have to make a decision based on those things about something that you think you will enjoy. And if the restaurant hits on all of the things that they promised to hit you, then you need to pay for it. If you don't like it, I'm sorry, but you don't get to then on the waiter by tipping them 5% because you're upset that, oh, I didn't realize the salmon was going to be so salmony, which is like literally that's a real
Right.
quote that I've heard, right? But
Right.
people say the most absurd things, and then instead of calling the manager over to complain, they dock the server or the bartender because of things that were really outside of either one of those two people's controls, right? So, like, no, that is not specific to Black people because there are just as many, if not more, non-Black tippers than there are. But then we also have to be realistic about the situation for Black folks, right? Economics. We don't have, many of us don't have, far too many of us don't have the access to the expendable income that allows us to go out and have dinner at places that are going to cost you $200 after tip, right? And if you're not aware of that social contract and you sit down and you're like, okay, I'm looking at these numbers on the menu, but I'm not factoring in a 28% upcharge, bro. 28%. That's fucking crazy. We're looking at numbers on a menu, right? But the social contract says the 8% being taxed, 20% going to grat. This is what is expected of you. So I can put something onto the menu for $75, but like really what I'm saying is you got to pay 103. That is garbage. You know what I mean? That's like booking an Airbnb and thinking you got a deal for 200,
Yeah.
and next thing you know, it's 150 in cleaning fees. But like we know that 28% is there, so just put it on the goddamn menu and call it a day. Because like
Yeah.
that's what's fair, and that's what's honest. And a lot of people not gonna like that, and it's gonna further like deepen the disparity gap. But like I think we need to address that versus continuing to allow people in the industry. Because here's what's real. If the Black and brown restaurant workers, the bussers, right, the non-bartenders were making what they deserved in restaurants, the disparity gap, the income gap for the Black community would get better because the people working in those roles would be paying more money and they would possibly be able to go out, right? But for right now, we're allowing these people to come to work and maybe they make $50 for a shift, and then we give them a day off. And if you made $50 a shift times 5 days a week, how many jobs do you need to keep your house running? A lot.
Yeah, for sure. Like, do you think there's any reason to not give a certain level of tip if you're a patron at a restaurant?
Never.
So regardless of the quality of food, regardless of the quality of service, you feel like at minimum you should leave what percent?
Unless the restaurant is so bad that you have spoken to a manager, right? Like, here's my thing. Give your complaint directly. I'm not saying you tip for a experience, right? If they give you something that is not what was advertised, if they give you something that was cooked poorly, if your server or people on the staff give you a poor experience, because it is hospitality. It's not just about the product, it's about the experience, right? If those things happen, if things are unclean, right? Like there are a number of legitimate reasons that you should complain or talk to somebody, but none of those reasons, other than like atrocious service, like if the person that you are supposed to tip is an asshole, don't tip that person. But in not tipping, like you don't just zero tip and walk out. Like you talk to somebody, let them know that like, hey man, this person is the worst. Because the reality is, if you like that place, right? Like the assumption is you wanted to come and spend money here because you like what we do, or you were interested in what we do. If you care about us and like somebody fucked up, like I was a GM of a restaurant that was on pace to do $7 million a year in revenue.
Mm.
I can't know every single thing that happens on the floor. So, right, because I can't watch all that at once. Got too much going on. And all my managers can't watch all that at once. So if you have a terrible experience, let one of us know and give us the opportunity to make it good. If we don't do that, then like, yeah, don't tip. If you have a experience, you let somebody know. They don't do anything, then just bounce.
So speak up and give the establishment an opportunity to make it right.
Yeah. Because like everybody can have an off night. And one of the things that attracts me to great hospitality is how you can recover when you're not on your game, right? If you notice that I'm sitting here and I haven't really touched my food, ask me what's going on and offer to cook me something different. Maybe I'm just not hungry and I'm going to ask for a box, right? Or maybe this steak is dry as and I ain't want to complain about it because I'm not that dude, right? But like that's the hospitality part, right? If they're not hitting on that, then talk to somebody. But most of like those shitty tipper people, like they come in with bad expectations, right? Like so the server comes up to the table and they're like, "Oh, well, why can't I sit over there?" Okay. All right. And it's like, "Hey, well, you changed your menu? Well, the only reason I came out here was for the so and so. Like if that was the only reason that you came out here, you should have called us before you came out here."
Oh
right?
man.
Like those are the types of people that are going to give you bad tips because their expectations are poor and likely their communication skills are also poor. Because if you give most good establishments the chance to make it right, they will, and they'll do so like I mentioned previously, like at the damage to their own pocketbooks, right? Like I have personally refunded meals for people that I know were cooked right. I know it was cooked right. And I know it said this thing on the menu. And here you are, didn't read, didn't care, had what's that? That says, well, it says mozzarella. I didn't know mozzarella was cheese. I'm allergic to cheese. Like, bruh. But we comp those meals, right?
Yeah.
So in that world where restaurants will bend over backwards, why would you not say something?
Right.
Why would you tip the server 0%, man? Like I've had to comfort people from having full scale breakdowns because they had a table of 20 people and the bill was $3,000 and somebody tipped them 3%. Like that is
Crucial.
garbage.
Yeah.
That's crucial, man. That's rent, right? Like people are thinking about not being able to eat, not being able to pay their rent, feed their children. And you, because you could, or because you had a bad experience and didn't speak out about it, like any number of reasons, just didn't tip. But reality is, if people can pay less for a product, they will. And for that reason, the tip system got to go.
Word. Now, I appreciate that perspective. I do appreciate that perspective. I think it's something that, hopefully listeners, people watching, consider. I myself, I have to say, like, I did work at a restaurant at a point in time, but I was a host at Conky overall 15501. That was
love Conky.
That was I was in high school at the time, senior year of high school, but working with the servers, the kitchen folks, and just seeing the impact of folks coming in, spending a bunch of money, not leaving a tip, just the realities and the impact that had. It changed how I go out. So I have situations where we've gone out and I'll leave the tip, but then on the back of the receipt, I'll write a handwritten note to say you were trash as and you lucky I left this tip, you trash server. And I would really write a hand note of how trash they were, but still leave a good tip and go on about my business.
Respect, bro. Respect. I once had an experience so bad in Chapel Hill at a place that I went to all the time. And mind you, I'm industry, right? So there's a lot I'm willing to put up with, right? Like maybe you hungover or whatever, right? Like I'm here for you. So if you give me service, bro, I'm also easy, right? Because I know how to make your job easy. I don't ask a lot. I know what I want. Like I know your menu probably better than you do. I got service. It was so trash at this place that I walked up to the busser and I was like, yo, you're the only person who took care of me today. And I tipped that busser $20 at a brunch spot where I didn't even order alcohol. So basically, I tipped that dude 100% of my bill,
Yeah.
and I left the server like a smooth 5%. And I talked to the manager; they ain't say shit. So I made sure somebody got money, and it was the person who took care of me, right? Like the busser
Mm.
saw me sitting down and brought me my menu. The busser saw the server ignoring me, got me a water, right?
Oh
Like
wow.
server came over, took my order, left, came back when it was time for the bill, didn't check in. Like I don't feel bad not tipping that person, but I put some money into the building and my conscience feels strong about that.
Yeah. Word. And so, what point along the journey did you actually start building a business around bourbon? Because you got the introduction, but and you've got this experience in the restaurant business, and you started, were managing restaurants, but then you start to build something of your own as a business around bourbon. Like, what was the light bulb to say, you know what, I think I should do this?
Um, it's partly because I have an amazing partner, right? Like this podcast is about family. And for not a lot of my restaurant career, but for the last few years, my wife was working on her PhD. And, for a couple of those years was pregnant with one and then another fantastic young men. And so restaurants, especially management, like I said, because I got into it around the time when we were pregnant with our oldest child, it served a purpose. It gave stability. It was a consistent check and it was good money from the places that I was working, but it wasn't fulfilling. And I needed to get to a place where I could share my passion for the things that I love, food and drink, with a community that was more reflective of the people that I enjoy kicking it with. So I started the Black Bourbon Guy in 2020, just past my 3-year anniversary, while I was still bar manager and then GM of a place in Raleigh called Stir. But it was the middle of the pandemic, so I was only working 40 hours a week instead of the traditional restaurant, 60. So what do I do with those other 20 hours? You start a business. And it was side gigs, right? Here and there, kind of proof of concept, trying to see if it would work. And it
And
was based on,
what was the original proof of concept? You would do tastings, like what were you offering at that time period?
so it was originally virtual tastings. It was an idea to help people connect with each other in the middle of the pandemic, right? Because people weren't going anywhere. Nobody was traveling. But you know what everybody was doing? We were drinking the shit out
Yeah,
of some bourbon
yeah,
and tequila,
yeah, yeah.
right?
Through the roof.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We weren't going anywhere but the liquor store for about 3 or 4 years. So it was a great opportunity to have fun, kind of social experiences. And it started because I was running my mouth with a bunch of friends of mine in Brooklyn about scotch one night. And somebody was like, "Hey, have you ever considered like doing this for a living? Because I bet people would pay money to have you curate fun tasting experiences for them." And a lot of it is not just the tasting experience, it's the history. Because again, centering blackness in all of this, you can tell a story of American whiskey or of the United States through the lens of American whiskey. And that's not just bourbon. It's rye whiskey, it's Tennessee whiskey, it's single malt, it's all of the American whiskeys. But you can tell that story through the lens of the spirit, which is one of my favorite things in addition to just drinking it. And in many ways, you can center Black and brown and female contributions in ways that they are not traditionally in the restaurant and bar scene. So I wanted to break free from that to see how I could do my part to try and contribute, right? Try and make this crazy, mystical, stupid, expensive restaurant and bar scene a little bit more welcoming for Black and brown people by sharing my passion and my experience having navigated these things in spaces.
Word. Word. That's dope. And it had COVID not have happened, do you think the idea ever would have came to be?
Uh, it eventually, at some point, I was going to divorce from restaurants. When
Mm.
that came, I don't know what that was going to be. I think COVID produced a lot of things, many of which were awful and terrible. But there was a lot of good to come out of COVID.
Yeah.
And I think it brought the entrepreneurial and the hustler spirit out from a lot of us, and specifically for the restaurant industry. And again, I'm going to keep hammering the restaurant industry because they deserve it. When COVID hit, restaurants fired a bunch of their people.
Yeah.
Why? Because they could, right? Because they weren't on the hook for all those enormous unemployment payments because you didn't have the labor payment history. And so you had people who, like, and many people had, the ground taken out from under their feet when COVID hit, but it hit the restaurant industry like nobody's business. And there were a bunch of us, and I count myself among the fortunate ones. I kept my job the whole way through. I took a little bit of a pay cut, but a little bit of a pay cut is better than 100% pay cut.
No question. No question.
Right?
I had to take a pay cut during COVID as well. I mean, look, at that point, the way that things were going down with the uncertainty, like pay cut was like, no problem. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like,
Bro, my boss at the time, he called me and he was like my district manager called me after the whole email he went out. He said, I just want to make sure that like you're good, you're in a good place, we like you. And I said, bro, like y'all only hit me with a 20% pay cut, like only 20%. Like I'm straight, and I only work 40 hours a week, right? So, also I can read a P&L sheet. I know y'all ain't making no money right now, so I take this as a blessing. But I am not, and if another pandemic happens or whatever happens, it will affect all of us. But achieving some level of financial independence that doesn't put you in a scenario where you have to be reliant upon an industry that got absolutely hammered was something that many of us opted to do, right? So I have people who go out recently and they complain about bad service at restaurants. And I say, yeah, well, like, it's changed, right? One, a bunch of people died. A bunch of people died. And restaurant people were front facing in a way that was not recognized and prioritized, at least from a health perspective, during the pandemic, right? So a lot of restaurant people lost their lives. And I think that many folks are not honest about those numbers. So you lost a lot of talent, right? You lost a lot of very talented people, a lot of people who had experience and were good at their jobs. And then you had a number of people who said, look, I can't get laid off because your business model doesn't work in a pandemic, right? Our government didn't respond well. So I can't put my family's welfare on the line in the hopes that the next president has our shit together for whatever the next thing is that jumps off, right? How many things have we seen that have gone on that have interrupted the industry? So a bunch of people got out of restaurants. They said, nah, man, it. And I was one of those people, not just because of that, right? I was also had been unhappy for a very long time, but the lack of stability combined with a very, very shaky business model, it took a bunch of us who were really good and seasoned out. And so what many restaurants are left with, and like how many new restaurants do you see opening in Durham every other day, right?
Yeah.
And they're hiring from this pool of brand new people, all kinds of people new enroll across so many industries, but few were impacted to the degree from a labor perspective that the restaurant industry was. And so, I mean, cats are struggling, but that's not stopping people from opening restaurants. And now that COVID gone, that's not stopping us from going out, which is why people are opening restaurants. So, when you get service, do that math.
Yeah, man. And I have to admit, service I would say overall quality of service has declined post-COVID. I have to say, I would say just the overall dining experience is declined post-COVID, if I'm just being honest. And I think that's in large part the cost of food, cost of real estate, to have a space, to have a restaurant, especially in, prime areas. It makes it very difficult to have a sustainable business. But you pivoted out and created something that gives you a bit more flexibility. Like you can curate certain events, but the thing about bourbon is that's not a cheap investment either. In terms of when you started talking about those wines, there are some bottles of bourbon out there that can get really expensive too. And then in terms of, a quality bottle, price points typically start around $50 or so and up. Typically, maybe some of the 30s. I don't know your opinion on that, but I would say most of the decent, if you want a decent pour, probably going to start at the ABC store around $40 to $50. Would you disagree with that?
No. I mean, yes, I would. I think there are some dynamite pours that are in the $20 to $30 range. So I think you gotta, just like with wine, you gotta figure out what the occasion is, right? Again, it's all about expectations. Like tonight, I'm drinking something really fun because I'm sitting here with you. I'm having a good time. I'm drinking E.H. Taylor Small Batch. Would I, on a regular Tuesday night, sit around drinking E.H. Taylor Small Batch? Like, no. Why? Because E.H. Taylor Small Batch is not expensive. I paid $55 for this bottle, right?
I wish I could get a bottle of it.
Right. And I get you a bottle right now. You can hop on to Google right now. You can find you a nice bottle for $125.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Right. And like that world is not sustainable. So that's the other side of why I do what I do. It's not just about bringing the message to a more diverse group, but it's about helping people understand that a lot of people are new and into bourbon. And just because you see a list out there that says that good bourbon starts at 50, $60, that doesn't mean that it does. Rule number one, figure out what does it for you. I got a bunch of what I call like my everyday bottles that are in the $20 to $30 range, right? I have
And
a
you
crystal decanter.
Drink it straight?
Yeah.
Word.
Yeah. I have a crystal decanter downstairs and I keep Wild Turkey 101 in there.
Okay.
And when people come over and they don't know any better and they're like, can I have a nice pour? I pour up some Wild Turkey 101 out of that crystal decanter and they look at me like, ooh, what is this? And I'm like, man, this is the finest in $27 bourbon that you'll find, right? But like, I have a buddy who owns a James Beard nominated bar program and he also loves Wild Turkey 101. So like most people frankly wouldn't know good whiskey if it smacked them in the face, right? So much of it is marketing. Marketing, marketing, marketing. These companies have been trying to sell their product largely unsuccessfully since 1933. They've only been fairly successful in the last 10 years or so, which is to say that they're still out here trying to sell all kinds of things. And I mean, there are things that people will put out there that they think should encourage you to like a whiskey that have nothing to do with whether you'll like a whiskey or not, right? Like people go crazy and they pay hundreds of dollars for old whiskey. Why?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you know that you like old whiskey better? Do you know that old whiskey tastes better? Did you know that at some point old whiskey reaches a point where all you can taste is the wood and you can no longer really discern the quality of the original distillate? And at that point, because Kentucky or the US is so hot, it's not like Scotland. We can't do 60-year-old bourbons here. We can barely do 20-year-old bourbons here.
Mm.
So you sitting here saying that I only drink 10-year-old stuff or better, like, well, there's a very limited number of 10-year-old bottles out here. Also, some of my favorite bottles are like 4 years old, and you're paying $500 for your 10-year-old bottle average, and I'm paying $30 to $40 a bottle. So figure out what your palate is and shop based on that. But even right here in North Carolina, you can go to the ABC store today and you can find a bunch of stuff that will do it for you. And you don't really have to pay more than $70, $75.
Yeah. No, I do agree with that. I do agree with that. And to point out, just to like emphasize the point, when you talk about the different whiskeys, say in Scotland, that's one of the crazy things about whiskey to me is that you can have the same mash and pour it into 3 different barrels and put them in different places in the same room and get 3 completely different flavor profiles just from where they're placed in the environment. And I'm talking about literally within the same room and you get different flavors.
100%.
So to the point of too, like, the environment, up there in Scotland where it's very cloudy, rainy, less, it's not as warm as it is here. Especially like in, a Kentucky type environment, like you said, like that summer heat, what they call it, the Angels,
The Angel share.
the Angel share. Yeah, I would imagine that's going to be more impactful in terms of the what evaporates in an environment like this than you have to deal with, say, in a colder environment like a Scotland. I would imagine, but that's how delicate whiskey is. Like where it's aged, how long it's aged, the environment, which it all goes into the profiles, which to me is like one of the craziest things about it.
Yeah, and it's again, most people have no idea what that means, right? I tell when I'm training bartenders, I tell them that your job as a bartender is to demystify the world of alcohol, because the world of alcohol is huge and it is kind of scary and intimidating, right? Like when you walk into an ABC store and you see 4 shelves that are 15 feet long worth of American whiskey, like how do you know what to buy? And even if you were to reduce that shelf to 25% of that, that would still be 30, 40 bottles. Like how do you pick, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a scary and it's a difficult world. Fortunately, I drink a lot, and so I'm happy to help people navigate that world. But I totally understand how difficult it can be, and specifically for whiskey, because like Jordan's, whiskey is hot right now. Bourbon is hot right now. People chase stuff largely based off of reputation. Like, why did you know that you needed to chase Blanton's? Because it's the same reason I knew that I needed to chase Blanton's, is because everybody chases Blanton's.
Right.
And the first time I had Blanton's, and this is not to speak ill of Blanton's, I was underwhelmed compared to like some of the other like high level stuff I had, right? And I'm spoiled. I worked with people from Kentucky, Tennessee. Like I got gifted a bottle of Weller 12 year like 3 years ago, free 99.
Oh wow, yeah.
So some of the stuff
I got an unopened bottle of Blanton's that I have yet to taste Blanton's, and I just have that bottle that I purchased, and I'm waiting for a reason to crack it open for like an occasion when somebody comes through. But I feel like I'm gonna be underwhelmed too, because I like a higher proof myself, just if I'm being honest. And it's just, I was kind of looking at it, I was like, this ain't really gonna probably be what I want, but gotta try it.
I've had Blanton straight from the barrel. I think it was fantastic. I've had Blanton Gold. Both of those from a proof perspective, they do it a little bit more for me. But again, that's not to speak ill about Blanton's, because if you love Blanton's, right, and I'm not saying you, but whomever, what you like is what you like, right? I'm kind of a proof monster. So I like the barrel proof stuff, right? Like you see the Booker's, you see the Booker's bottles over my shoulder, and every time Woodford comes out with barrel proof, batch proof release, I'm in there, but like that's not for everybody, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of people like older, smoother stuff. Like the first time I tried Elijah Craig 18 year, I was like, meh, I can see objectively why you love this. And I love other Elijah Craig products. But for me, at 94 proof in 18 years, meh.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's fine, right? Different strokes for different folks.
Yeah. Word up. And so, like, what type of, like, having a, like, what is this brand and what does it offer? Like, what can people get from the Black Bourbon Guy?
One, education is what I'm here for. I'm here to help. Like I said, I'm a nerd at my core. I spend a lot of time going down the rabbit hole, learning as much as I can, both about whiskey science and whiskey stories. So helping to educate people on what it is that they like, what whiskey is, right? Because I can't count how many people have asked me, like, what is a bourbon and what is a whiskey? I have to answer that question. Like, that's totally okay, right? But again, demystifying the world of whiskey, helping people understand what they like. introducing that level of education and comfort and familiarity with a broad group of people so that more of us can have comfort going into places and talking that, right? Knowing that, like, hey, I want to come in and be like, yo, you got 4 roses small batch? Nah, all I got is single barrel. No, I don't really love the single barrel, right? I don't love a high rye bourbon. But that
Mm-hmm.
small batch is what does it for me, and I know it's not a high rye, right? So just helping people feel more comfortable in the spaces that I did very well in is something that's important to me. You know what I mean? But I mean, sharing the love and the knowledge. Yeah, what did Biggie say? Spread love is the Brooklyn way, and that's what I'm about.
Word up. Now, man, I think it's really dope on a couple of different levels in that having that entrepreneurial front of perspective of building something around a passion, I think is really fire. And it's like hearing the story of just, it's a passion that came with time. You start in one place that opens up doors in other areas, which then leads to other areas. And then the timing of COVID and everything, that's what it's like. You never know what life is preparing you for and when the opportunity will come to strike. And the fact that you were able to, see it and realize it, like you took advantage, but at what point did it click to say, I know you said somebody said, you should do it, but then you start doing it. At what point does it click for you to say, this is it? Like, I know that this is going to be a sustainable thing.
I don't know that I've reached that point, frankly.
Word.
Like I mentioned earlier, I have an amazingly supportive partner, and she was one of the first people and the biggest advocates to say, like, hey, I think you should try this, And when the person who is responsible for the other half of the finances or whatever percentage of the finances in the household has that confidence in you, that's huge, right? Because I don't think you can do it without the support of family. Entrepreneurship without family does not work because it ain't easy.
Yep.
So without that, I certainly could not have done this. But I think it's like 3 years in, I've been telling people now that I'm 3 years in, I feel significantly better about things than I did, say, 6 months ago. Because if you ask an entrepreneur if they are successful within the first year or two and they tell you yes, I feel like that person is lying to you or projecting or putting it out there. You know what I mean? Like, there are so many things that can go wrong. And whether it's competition or you just trying to achieve proof of concept, it takes time to get it right. Right.
Yeah.
So I think now, finally, that I'm in year 4 of operation, I feel a little bit better about things as being sustainable, right? Like I've done okay in the first 3 years. I'm coming up with new ideas. Like I'm currently working on a series of trips touring people down to the Bourbon Trail because I spent so much time in Kentucky that I made some dope relationships and people reached out and they were like, hey, we'll pay you if you design an itinerary and take us down to the trail. And I was like, man,
I
that's
would,
not
yo,
something that
I would participate, like, straight up, because I've been looking for a reason, because falling into the bourbon, and then you start learning about how Kentucky is the sweet spot and all of the world's best, or the bourbon is American, but the best comes from this certain area in the trail. And I ain't gonna lie, like, my wife is not really into it like that, but I'm looking for an excuse to make that trip. So when I'm gonna be following along, obviously, but when the next one of those comes along, I'm gonna see if I can try and actually make that happen, because that's something I'm trying to do with a guy who can help, provide the education, provide the other tidbits of information that make it a real experience for sure.
I appreciate you, man. And it's things like that, right? It's people like you saying things like that. Like, you are my target market, bro. You know what I mean? And hearing that I'm providing a service that people appreciate for my own community and can help me pay some bills at the same time, like that's a big deal.
Yeah.
You know, that's a big deal. That's something that many people are not blessed enough, because I can't understate, man. It's a unique opportunity to be able to be an entrepreneur, to have the freedom to be an entrepreneur, right? Like, my ancestors worked damn hard for me to go to undergrad on a full ride, and then to be able to say, it, I'm going to go work for myself. And it's not like I said, it, right? Like, my education helped with that, right? But I didn't go into a place where a Carolina degree opened doors for me. I actually had to put my education to work. And, you know, I stand on the shoulders of giants, and I feel like I have to not necessarily repay a debt, but to keep that moving, right? To make an example, to help out my community, to set and leave a legacy for my children, so that hopefully they understand that, you know, that's important for them as well. It's not just about you, it's trying to help somebody, even if it's just one person.
Yeah, man, I agree. I think that's a great mindset, you know, to be of service, to not be yourself, to really see yourself as a vessel of service to the community and people around you. And I relate to that, man. So like I said, I found out about you randomly from the white waitress at Alley 26 who had to let me know that the Black Bourbon Guy was just here. And then when I saw the social media, it clicked where I was like, oh, it's really a Black Bourbon Guy. She wasn't just telling me this because I'm Black. Like, I was like, yo, I was so like, why is she telling me about a Black Bourbon Guy? But it's really the Black Bourbon Guy. And then I was like, oh, and then I also saw you had around the holiday season, you had some I saw some of your product or something that you had in the ABC store on certain bottles of bourbon. Like what was that, and how did you get that opportunity to actually put some merchandise in the ABC store, seeing that it's ran by the state?
So again, it's connections. It's a career in hospitality. I've had a lot of people, both like black, brown, and non-black and brown, who have been extremely supportive. So one of the things that I started doing last spring was making my own cocktail syrups, right? So non-alcoholic cocktail syrups that people can take home to use to spin up like fun DIY cocktails. Again, the business was started in the middle of COVID, and so many people became home mixologists. So, you know, trying to
Right.
help you have fun experiences in the home. But the recipes that I started with were meant to kind of incorporate things that were from my tradition. So the first cocktail syrup I made was called Sil Sorrel, and it's a drink, or it's a syrup based on a drink called sorrel from the West Indies, and it's named after my grandmother, who is from Antigua. But then the one you saw in the store was an old fashioned syrup. So I put together an old fashioned syrup because, I mean, if you're the Black Bourbon Guy, you should probably have an old fashioned syrup if you're going to make cocktail syrup. And through a local connection, I had a distributor, because again, ABC system was like, hey, we heard you do cocktail syrups and we're looking for a local product to pair with a couple of different brands. So lo and behold, I bottled up 800 miniature bottles of old fashioned syrup and was able to sell them to that distributor. And they got put on bottles of Jefferson's,
Yep.
what else was it? There was Old Scout, and I forget the third and fourth ones, but it was a really amazing opportunity to get the products out there. And again, just to have a black person, a black face on a bunch of bottles, inviting people to come in and check out these things. Because again, it's all about inclusion for me.
Yeah, I gotta admit, I think it's dope to see Black Bourbon Guy as the brand, be in knowing that it's like a Black Bourbon Guy. You know what I'm saying? Like, like it's like, word. That's kind of dope. Like, this is in the fact that you've been able to curate the relationships to be able to, you know, like you know, being in Durham. Like myself, you know, I'll shout out Alley 26 because I go there. I get the burger all the time. Like, it's one of the, if it's not the best burger in the city, it's one of the best burgers in the area at Alley 26. Like I'm not even gonna front. It's one of the.
It's ridiculous.
And I get it with the fried egg, bacon. I mean, it's just delicious. And they do the fries right too. I mean, I ain't gonna lie, I'm hungry right now, and that burger is a slapper. And so I always go there and get the burger, and they are. I'm not gonna assume here, but I know that they are also James Beard. In the I don't know if they're just nominated or if they actually. I think they won for a cocktail menu at one point. Maybe they were just nominated.
They were runner up.
Runner up. Okay. But a recognized establishment for their cocktail menu, just if nothing else, if you're looking for a spot like in Durham that has like gonna have like a nice experience from a drinks perspective, like the cocktail menu is great, but then the burger there is just and I'm for you to have those relationships to be able to go in there and do events at a place like that, to see the joints in the ABC store, like you're doing a lot of the right things, man. Like it's definitely, I can see just in the short bit of time since following you, like I can see the trajectory, and you're starting to do like corporate events and stuff like that too, where you're able to get with groups. Is there any like, are you able to curate events for like a date to groups? Like what's the range of stuff that you can actually people can reach out to you for if they were interested in trying to do something with you, whether it be virtually or in person?
So I still do some virtual events, right, for people who are outside of the Durham area who are interested in linking up. I'm happy to share that with a large group of people, but in this area I'm largely doing in-person events with pretty decent sized groups of people. Now, I mean, I have worked with any number of folks, right? Like I had a great couple about a year ago hire me to come out and just do a fun bourbon cocktail class with them. And so literally it was a date night idea, right? And the two of them were fantastic and we had a good time. But like you mentioned, I've also been doing a handful of pretty sizable corporate events. One of the things I pride myself in as a hospitality professional is the ability to adjust what I can do to any number of people. You know what I mean? Like I have worked at tiny restaurants that only seated 50 people, and how you do things there has to change, right? And
yeah,
like I said earlier, I've also managed restaurants where we had 7 mil in revenue, and how you do things on that level also has to change. So my background in restaurant operations has aided me tremendously in terms of being flexible and able to set up events for groups of different sizes.
word. Yo, and we're gonna close out here shortly. I just want to ask, is there anything like for the listeners that might be watching? Obviously, we're going to make sure we get all your follow-up contact info. We'll make sure that's in the description. If you're listening or watching on YouTube, we'll have everything to get in contact available. Anything you hope that folks listening are able to take away after just hearing this conversation today?
I mean, main takeaways: Black people love bourbon, right? Black people love bourbon, and still, I find some frustration about some of the bourbon groups that exist out there because diversity provides a richness to every situation. And it's not just diversity in race and ethnicity, it's diversity in gender.
Mm-hmm.
So if your bourbon group is just a bunch of dudes, I don't give a if they just a bunch of white dudes, black dudes, right? If your bourbon group is homogenized, if your bourbon events are homogenized, if your restaurant, bar, etc. are homogenized, like you old news, we off that,
Mm-hmm.
right? We want to be in a place where inclusivity is valued. And I want to continue to see that in my own little space, right? The restaurant world, the bourbon world. So, like, I want to see people try to continue to diversify their own personal groups, Also, I want restaurants to understand that there are certain brands out there that through having these brands on your shelf, you are giving a dog whistle that tells many of us that we shouldn't, not that we shouldn't, that we are not welcomed within your doors. Some of these restaurants and bars genuinely don't understand that, right? Because some of the companies out there, they do a really good job of kind of sliding some of their garbage right under the radar. But
Are you saying that there are companies that don't want people like us using their products? Is that what you're saying?
That's not specifically what I'm saying, but based upon the way that they advertised, it comes across that way for me. So take, for example, something that recently came across my radar. There's an operation called Bogue Sound Distillery. I believe they're based in Wilmington, North Carolina. And they make don't quote me on this because I've never tried it, but they make a whiskey that I believe is called Joseph Connolly Salted Caramel Whiskey. And I've never tried it because I don't drink like salted caramel whiskey. That's just not my thing. Not to disparage it, right? I like the big boozy stuff. Sweet stuff, not for me. But
agreed.
A colleague of mine reached out because I had mentioned some other brands that I don't love and was like, hey, do you know about Bogue Sound Distillery? So did a little bit of quick research. And if you look on their website, they mentioned that Joseph A or P or whatever his middle name, Connolly, was a soldier in the 1800s who fought in some, undisclosed North Carolina regiment. And it's like, okay, well, like, which one of the North Carolina regiments did he fight in? And then it goes on to talk about how in some specific battle he repelled the enemy that you later found out like the enemy was the Union Army.
Right.
So they are glorifying this Confederate soldier, referring to like actual Army vets, people who died for a very noble cause, people who died in service of our country, referring to these people as the enemy, but not having the courage to actually acknowledge that we're honoring a Confederate individual. So at a time where there is remarkable divisiveness in this country, it seems really, really ridiculous that this company would be out here putting this person up, yet failing to have the cojones to acknowledge the narrative that they're trying to put out there, right? Letting people know that, like, hey, if you have Joseph Connolly salted caramel whiskey on your shelves, you are, whether you know it or not, advertising for Confederate folks and for people who support the lost cause narrative, which, you know all about the lost cause narrative. I don't have to get into it, but there are a handful of companies that do sneaky shit like that. And I really enjoy telling people that these things are happening so that those items get removed from their shelves or so that their sales decrease. Because, you.
Yeah. Losers.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Man. That is crazy, man. Yo, I appreciate you joining. Man, if you out there listening, especially if you're in the Triangle area, reach out. He's got the ability to curate the events, the tastings, different experiences, even the travel joints. I'm going to be on the lookout for that next trip to the Bourbon Trail because that is something I definitely am trying to tap into. If y'all ain't, if you at this point right now, you need to hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit that notification bell no matter where you're watching or listening. This is the G Podcast where we focus on family, friends, finances, freedom, and our future, and everything else. This is the G Podcast. Shout out to the Black Bourbon Guy for joining. We are out of here, man. Cheers, cheers, cheers. Y'all already know what it is, man.
It doesn't matter how you feel.
No talk.
Salute, my man.